Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about A Quiet Place. A spoiler alert, I guess. This movie is very, very quiet. So I don't need to make any more quiet jokes again. That's kind of the hook that brings you in, and it's sort of everything. How this film uses its own quietness and how it uses it in both an arty way, but also manages to make a very populous, kind of big, multiplex survival horror movie at the same time is frankly amazing. John Krasinski's attempts at being anything in terms of the filmmaking world outside of that guy from The Office have never deemed to me to be very successful, but this comes as a very assured, smart kind of director. It's the kind of film that's directed in such a way that makes you sit there and wonder, what is that director doing next? And when you hear them announced for another project, you're like, oh, Quiet Place was good, I'm glad they're getting that. But it's kind of directed in this very assured way, in the kind of way that mainstream audiences really like, while also being sort of arty in its very conceptual nature. This kind of reminds me of things like Don't Breathe in particular, which was kind of trying to be a more quiet movie, but I think this has a lot more fun with it. Don't Breathe, which was still good. This is much better than that. This plays within that quietness and uses it as a filmmaking tool as much as you might think you could watch this without having sound. It sort of needs that quietness. You know, I think this is a film that uses the sound department almost better than most films, because oftentimes when you talk about sound mixing and sound design and so forth, people just think of Star Wars and big explosion movies. But when you do a movie that's very quiet and precise in this way, you're really relying on them quite a bit. So I actually wanted to have this thing. This is just a picture from IMDb of the sound department as credited through IMDb, and I think they deserve a lot of credit for this film being as successful as it is. And since there's a lot of them and I'll screw up their names, I just wanted to show that. In terms of sound design, this is the kind of things that the Coen brothers usually do in terms of sound design, the kind of Lynchian, kind of like slow, like quiet noises, but he's doing it more of the precise, you know, very mannered blockbuster kind of, you know, mainstream precise storyteller kind of way. But it also feels like John Krasinski as a filmmaker is someone who's been making things, you know, outside of the studio system, and this feels like a director who's kind of not been in the studio system making their first studio film. He might have directed a few episodes of The Office and whatnot, but this very much feels that. It feels a little rough in some places, particularly in how it goes from suddenly quietness to music and so forth. That might be because it's a little unconventional, you know, you don't really have that as often as this film does, so it might be more of how different it felt. And even watching this in a theater felt different, because when this movie started and people were laughing and talking, and I could tell, I was like, this might be a rough ride. I might need to see this again or something. Like, I was worried there was an old guy snoring. It was rough at the beginning, but then the film grabs you, and when the film grabs you, it doesn't really let you go. I don't really know if people were talking after a certain point. I was so in it, but it didn't feel that way. I had a soda and I didn't actually finish it. And sure, every movie's different, but for real, you know, it's more fun if a film grabs you and you feel like you need to absolutely be there, and this film did. But it also scared me. It also was thrilling. It was also suspenseful. It used set pieces so incredibly well. It set up all those set pieces incredibly well. Sometimes it didn't and would surprise you, but I still think it worked in that way. The last third of this film had a set piece after set piece after set piece in such a way that at a certain point when they'd start up, I'd be like, oh my god, I can't do this again. Like just like chill the fuck out, Quiet Place. I need some time before you do this again. But then very quickly, I was so wrapped up in it, I loved it. This is a really enjoyable, wonderful, suspenseful horror film. All of the performances in this are so physical and so sort of different. I mean, you really have to be a very self-assured actor to do more of a physical performance like this, especially nowadays, because they're not really speaking for very much of the movie at all. So using that kind of physicality to kind of tell this story, and using so much visually to tell this story. There's not a lot, you know, most of the time, you know, you think of, you know, someone will ADR a line just for storytelling reasons. Well, you can't really do that in A Quiet Place. You need to visually tell everything you're doing, and through, as an actor, and all the storytelling you need to do through your acting needs to be done through these physical performances. Emily Blunt is amazing in anything, pretty much. She shows her versatility yet again, and she's absolutely amazing. I mean, it's kind of crazy that she'll do this and Mary Poppins in the same year, and I'm sure she'll wow me in both. I haven't seen Mary Poppins yet, but it's the fact that she can bounce between like horror and action and big budget musicals says a lot about her as a performer. And her versatility, and she's kind of one of those classical kind of character actresses that we don't really get anymore, kind of in the old Hollywood sense. And this is just, she was just so absolutely good in this. John Krasinski, who has been trying to kind of rehab his image, he's doing a Jack Ryan series on Amazon Prime or something, and it does feel like he's really trying to change it up. I think this is probably the best attempt in that, like, he doesn't rely on any of the things that we know him for. It's like we get a whole different John Krasinski or something. As a director, he does an amazing job, but as an actor as well, he really kind of changes up, doesn't use the familiar takes. He doesn't like look at the camera in the gym kind of office way he did. So I think he really transformed himself in terms of, because it doesn't feel like the same guy in a lot of ways. So it shows more of how he is kind of changing, and this feels like a different phase of his career that's just starting. You have the two kids in it, Millicent Simmons, who is actually deaf in real life. I think she's absolutely amazing. She does a really great performance, and obviously she's able to play deaf since she is actually deaf, is able to use that kind of her frustration with what her family's going through, her being a teenager in a world where you can't speak because giant sound monsters will come and attack you and kill you. Because she's deaf and because her whole family knows sign language anyway, they were able to survive a lot better. And there's kind of like a guilt, one, I think, at the situation they're in, and also what happened to her younger brother, which is in the trailer, so it's not really a spoiler. And then Noah Jupe, who plays their son, who has a real like mournful, scared quality to most of his performance. It's hard for a lot of actors to pull off the entire time in a way that you can tell how scared and worried he is really bearing down on him. You know, you can get the sense that they have been stuck in this situation for a long time. As much as it feels like a big, fun, thrilling mainstream movie, watching this with an audience almost has a meditative quality, because you're all sort of transfixed by this thing that I feel like most people, when it started, were like, is this going to work? How is this going to go down? Are you guys going to talk through this whole movie? I don't know. And it is kind of a different thing. John Krasinski was very good at not having it be completely silent. There's music and so forth. So if you're like super worried about that, there's music by Marco Bellomitri, and I think that music works really well to heighten up the suspense of it, and without it I don't think this film would be as good as it is. It's a very lean 95-minute. I was like, oh man, this movie's like almost over. Wow. And almost like a perfect 95 minutes. It doesn't really hit me very well, and this is like a very memorable, very intense 95 minutes. It's one of the few films where I see it and I go, wow, that almost felt like too short. Like I wanted to see more of it. It was like perfect in that you leave the audience wanting more, and you really, really do. I don't think it's necessarily a perfect film. It does feel a little rough in certain places. It does feel like it's artiness, and it feels like a rougher kind of arty kind of style to it with the blockbuster nature to it, which works really well, bizarrely enough. What this movie is not about is the alien invasion or the fact that you have crazy sound monsters killing people or anything like that. It's about the family and their relationship, but it's also about the thrillingness of the situation they're in. The situation and the story and the thrillingness of this film almost plays as strongly as it does with character. And you can tell that he was a director who came from, you know, small indie films, which I didn't see, and I'm guessing if you watch this review, you probably haven't either, except for the guy in the comments who said, I've seen all his films and I love them, and good for you. I will like your comment, I guess. You can tell he's a director who made films about character and understood what makes any film. This isn't most films that connect to an audience, you know, in a big blockbuster mainstream way that matter to an audience and speak to them. They have to have something to do with character. Now, you can make a weird art film, and there are all sorts of different, you know, films that break that rule, but if you're talking to an audience on a mainstream level and you have movie stars in it and you want it to make money, you have to have a character and you have to have a connection and the family and their ins and outs, and you understand the stakes through their loss at the beginning of the film. You understand everything about this world through this family and through their experience, and you feel a connection to them. You don't actually hear certain characters like speak which is very weird, you know, and it feels like an odd connection because you know that they can speak. It feels like you're not connecting with them the same way you should. Now, I've seen lots of silent films, and I have no problem connecting to those people, but it feels like because they are cut off from how they're normally used to communicating, that you are cut out from them almost on a personal level, but you still understand them and you feel for them, and you feel, you know, I don't know a lot of these characters' names, and like looking at the Wikipedia, it has like their last name is Abbott. I didn't fucking know that shit when I watched the movie, but you don't need to know that. You need to know these basic things. It's almost interesting how simple this story is. It's like, there are these sound monsters. I don't know, they came to Earth or something. Doesn't matter. What are these people's names? Are these even their kids, or their kids they just kind of like took in, or were friends' kids or something? But I think they are actually their kids. How did they get to this farm? You know, where are they from originally? You don't really need to know that. You just need to know they're on this farm. There are crazy sound monsters. There are apparently 3 of them around there, which they tell you visually through like notes that John Krasinski took, that the wife is pregnant, which is a crazy sequence, very pregnant, and that she's going to give birth soon. You understand all this visually, but in almost like very simple, very smartly simple way that broadcasts itself to any kind of cinema viewer. You know, you don't really need to know much about cinema or horror or anything like that to get this film, but it is very simple, kind of almost deconstructionist in the way that Halloween is. Now, settle down, it's not as good as Halloween, believe it or not, but in the deconstructionist way Carpenter took on the Halloween kind of slasher film, is what he did, is what John Krasinski did with A Quiet Place, in that he has deconstructed it to such a degree. The survival thing is that he's not thinking about all the extra things you need. He's almost thinking about just making the genre film and making it work, but giving you that connection to make it work. And without that connection, I don't think you would give a shit. It felt real. There's a real parentage theme in this film, and seeing a woman give birth and have a younger baby and have children in this and being protective of this spoke to me on a level of being a parent, which I didn't think this film would really do as well. It really hit me in certain ways. It really scared me. I actually kicked the seat in front of me. Thankfully, no one was there, or if they did, they didn't say anything to me and they hate me, but I'm going to go for the first one, I hope. This is a really great kind of thriller horror film, and I think in that sense, in terms of an audience getting really into it and playing with an audience and being a really good horror film and being about those thrills and being well directed, you should see it for that. But let's say you're watching this and go, Jim, I don't like horror films, despite the fact that I've seen only maybe 2 and they weren't really horror films. Sure, you know, fine, I get it, you're narrow-minded, that's cool. But this film has a lot to offer. What it's doing conceptually is very interesting. What it shows you about storytelling and how little you need to tell a story, but how much those little pieces matter, and how using those little pieces can matter tremendously. You know, there's film, it doesn't really matter how much your film costs. I'm not going to give an example like this is better than Michael Bay produced it. This is better than Transformers because it understands that. Sure, it's better than Transformers, but that's not the point. The point is this film understands how to use those like key elements. When you understand how to use those kind of key elements to really tell a story, which this film does, it kind of shows you like the kind of magic of filmmaking, in that you don't need to follow someone like their entire life or understand their entire life. You just need to understand these simple parts of it to tell the story and hit you effectively. Having parentage through it and being protective and trying to kind of survive through a world that's rapidly changing. And sure, I understand how you can read into that, but I think this film is mainly concerned with telling its story. So I think A Quiet Place will actually get to live on for quite a long time and past this era, and probably in the next era will represent something else to you then. And certain great films are able to do that, and I think A Quiet Place has a real universality to it that you don't see in modern day cinema anymore. You know, this film is more concerned with its universality and how it is telling the story, and how it is able to tell a story with just these simple kind of building blocks of cinema that should just be sort of a Mad Libs game, but they certainly get to work within its whole kind of crazy conceptual nature. And it is kind of like too many things almost at once that you feel like it should like fall apart and just be sort of an interesting odd little movie that you go, this could have been cool if someone had done this with it. But thankfully this is something that is actually cool and is a really great movie. And if you're someone who really wants to get into filmmaking and understand, you know, the bare bones of it, and how, you know, how you can just take these small things and say broad masterful ideas with them, A Quiet Place is a great film to watch, but it's also a really great film to watch with a date. It's a great kind of blockbuster mainstream movie, while also playing off of John Krasinski's kind of more art house Sundance-y kind of roots and understanding the character that he's done so well. This really shows a new promising director who I didn't even know we had in American cinema, suddenly just like coming out and showing you how much fun he can have with this concept and with a horror movie and understanding horror. It feels like someone who just like opened up to horror and let it come into their storytelling ideas and had a lot of fun with it, but understood how precise and how smart of a filmmaker you have to be to get that to work for you. This is a very smartly directed film and a very kind of wonderfully quiet film. It kind of sneaks up on you in a way where you're like, I don't know, movie, is this even gonna work? And by the end, you're just like being masterfully manipulated by some excellent direction that knows exactly what direction to point you in, and you are more than happy to go in that direction and go on this crazy experience and not even thinking about like how the hell did this work in the first place. It isn't even a shadow in your mind by the point that you get to the end of this film, because this film earns it and earns your attention to such a degree that is able to grab an audience. And really, this film wouldn't work if it wasn't able to grab an audience in a certain way to make them shut the fuck up and listen to the quietness of this film. So if you've seen A Quiet Place and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.